To the passive observers of religion throughout the world, it can be easily seen, this frustration in the disparate relationship between religions, this stubbornness, this dogmatic approach, this exclusivity that is so often practiced. These are the chosen people who did the right things, and these are not. This sort of energy is the frustration to those that are seeking a genuinely spiritual understanding, or even just the truth per se. Now, what if I told you that there is something that is fundamental, that weaves between all religions, all spiritualities of the world, and this is a story that we can all unify within? And that's the title card here. It is mysticism. Mysticism as this underlying fundamental catharsis or impetus of the religions across the world. But then the natural question is, well, what is it? And that's tricky. What I mean is, I can bring you a definition right now, but that would be useless because you would not see what's between the words of that definition. And to the general audience, we need to earnestly commit ourselves to going through this story, to dedicating ourselves to understand what this word really is, how it functions, the history of it, and where it's coming from, what it hints towards. And so instead of defining it outright, the whole of this session is a long spin that gives a basis. It initiates an understanding of how this subject works and how it unifies, and what it is that we can finally see is the thing underneath it all. And so we can begin by pointing out that the mystic experience is not exclusive. It can just as easily be had by the parties that are excluded by the major religion as it is with the parties included in the major religion. Whether this is like just for men, it could just as easily be had by a woman. Or it could just as easily be experienced by a poor, illiterate, and obscure person as it is the aristocracy, or as it is by somebody who's dedicated their life to monasticism. There are effectively two paths that lead toward the mystic experience. One is to do nothing, and that is that it is brought to you. This could be a dream. This could be a conscious experience. This could be a circumstance happened into that brings about a synchronicity so large that it changes the framework of how you contextualize life. Or it could be that you have dedicated your life to a religion, to an aesthetic lifestyle, and through this you bring it about. But also, there is the ceremonious occasion. This could be a handful of mushrooms. This could be an ayahuasca experience. This takes many forms, but again, there is no exclusivity. This path is open, and this path beckons. The classic example of this is Joan of Arc. You have a 13-year-old peasant girl, no education, given a vision that guides her to lead France into a victory over the English in the 100 Years' War. The question here is, what is this? What can come about us? How can we better understand this plural happening? Because these religious ecstasies, these mystical experiences have had profound effects on the history of philosophy, on the history of religion. I mean, any religion, especially the modern, whether Zoroastrianism or whether Christianity, are brought about by an individual who had a mystic vision. They had earned some divine understanding, or had been brought some divine understanding that started the whole babbling. But anyway, scholarly speaking, this term, mysticism, tends to be grouped into Chinese and Japanese religions, into Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, almost exclusive to those. And that is because of the written record of mystical experiences. Otherwise, you don't have much to point to. However, it's really not hard for us to see and to understand that this kind of experience goes well back into the shamanic way of life. The shaman solicits numinous experiences, solicits the channeling of spirits or deities, however you wish to dignify, in order to bring about prophetic vision, awe, and to tap into the mystery in order to bring back some information, some wisdom. The spirit is invited into the shaman, and the shaman's body becomes a voice for said spirit, this divine wisdom. It's not hard to see in observing any indigenous ceremony how this hypnagogic trance is solicited through the drum, through the dance, through fasting, so forth. This is all in an attempt to bring everybody, not just the shaman, but everybody, an altered moment is a kind of somewhat derogatory way of putting it, to open oneself to the divine as a therapeutic healing experience. But the kind of means to cultivate this is a loss of control, is a descansioning of knowledge, is a disassociation with, well, this is just the way it is. It is a letting go. That is one way of bringing about the experience. So we can see right away that in the ancient world, this kind of experience is not exclusive in any way within the culture. You have initiations for religious ecstasy for everybody in these ancient cultures. And as time moves forward, as we'll see, this kind of experience, this mystical religious ecstasy, becomes more and more exclusive, more and more exclusive. Now, it somewhat survives in how Taoists display religion and how their visions, the Taoist priests, so to speak, display their mystical experiences openly. This is reverential to the ancient shamanic past. The shaman displays how you go about soliciting so that others are invited into this resonance, invited into this space, so that they are familiar with it or they could imitate it. Now let's get some description, some terminology in here in order to better contextualize the future. So there is something referred to as a pure consciousness event. This is something observed in the history of philosophy. This could be understood as an emptying out. And this emptying out has to do with this living sensation of losing your concepts, thoughts, perceptions, senses, and still yet retaining consciousness. So this could be somewhat related to a lucid dream experience. Or imagine as you are falling into sleep, you retain consciousness. where would this leave you? What would that be like? There is also the case of, is this kind of experience introverted or extroverted? And what I mean by that is, does this experience happen purely within you, an internal sensation, say within a dream, or say as a enclosed event? Or does this experience appear to you externally? Does something happen outside of you that solicits a odd, inexplicable event? Regardless, though, if this experience, whether introverted or extroverted, brings you knowledge, conveys some sort of knowledge to you, the word for this is noetic. If you have lived an experience that felt more real than real, this is participating in a noetic reality, or a logos speaking kind of thing. But of course, if you have such a strange experience, the only word that can encapsulate this is ineffability. Something that cannot be expressed in language. Something that is absolutely indescribable. Insert the term mysticism here. Now, if we belong to this religion, then we have these words to describe this ineffable experience, and we'll do our best. And if we belong to this one over here, then we'll use these words to describe it, and we'll do our best. Regardless, though, the essence of it is ineffability, unspeakableness. Now, what about the word mysticism, though? And in this case, it's after the Romantic movement. There is this initiative to try to find something that unifies the different denominations of Christianity. And in this investigation came the invention of the word mysticism. So then the question is, where are they getting this word from? Well, that brings us back to the Greeks, and that brings us back to the, quote, mystery religions, the secret initiations, the Elysian, the Dionysian mysteries. And in this case, somebody who was being initiated into the mystery was a mystis. This word mystis comes from mayin, which means to close, that being the mouth or the eyes. And this is evocative of keeping a secret. So you have the initiate, the mystis, and then you have the mystigogos, which is the leader of this initiation. And then further yet, you have the leader of the whole initiative, the leaders of the cult, in quotes. And this is the Hierophantes. If you're familiar with tarot, then you're familiar with that term. Hierophantes is the revealer of holy things. Whole, the whole, holy things. You see what I'm doing there? To reveal the greater vision of what's going on here. Now, notice with me, we have a cultural vessel where anybody can show up and they can have a mystic experience. This, whatever this is, we have different hypotheses about this, whether they utilized the ergot of rye or whether they had hands in Amanita muscaria, whatever. You have a cultural vessel that invites anyone that wants it to have a religious ecstasy, to have a vision of the greater mystery. And as time goes on, you see already this isn't for everybody. It's for those who choose. But as time goes forward, this will become not even about choice anymore. This will become completely obscure. Regardless, though, having this experience is very implicative. It could change one's views on ideology, on ethics, on myths, on ceremony, on the idea of magic. It could change their contextualization of the world at large. And this is generally threatening to power structures. So allowing people the free expanse of mystic experiences is generally a thing for power structures to be allergic to. So as you can see, in the ancient past, everybody had initiation. And then now, with the Greeks, you have those who choose it, initiation. And then by the time the Christians will come about in the same area, after there were some secret cults in Rome, then this becomes completely gatekept, completely kept in. But let's dial it back further. Let's get an even greater perspective on this. So mysticism is often tied with Hinduism. In Hinduism, the phrase could be Atman is Brahman. And this roughly translated could be that the self or the soul is one with God. Very rough translation. That you are one with the whole thing. This approach could be traced back to the Upanishads, which could be anywhere between 800 500 BCE. These mystical ideas as the underpinning of religion, the realization of one's eternal self. Specifically, this is the that art thou philosophy or realization, that the sacred reality is that the external thing is thou, the eternal self. This is also, as a side note, the greater aspiration of poetry at large. Poetry all too often includes commentary on the exterior world. And through vision of that exterior world, through nature, you find allegories for the self, relating the anima with the anima. Thou art that art thou. I am one. The Atman, self, is Brahman. But the implications of this kind of understanding are various. We can go to the Upanishads and find this quote. Where there is a duality, as it were, one sees another, tastes another, speaks to another. But when everything has become one's own self, then whom and how would one see? The self is not this and not that. Right away here, you might be picking up on the paradox. We were just talking about how you are that, and then this is saying that you're not that. And that is the trick here. Obviously, when it comes to something that is so fundamental at the very base of existence, language will give way to paradox. Language is meant to express what is happening in this realm of things. We have developed this language to speak on the contextualization that we're approaching this world with actively. However, if something is compromising that, how good is our language? How good would 3D define 4D as a kind of cliche way of putting this, in the kind of scientism way of putting it? This way of being, though, this kind of experience has other words for it too. If we go to Buddhism, then it's tathata, the thisness of reality. This tathata is the Zen experience or the nirvana experience. This calm, this absoluteness, this suchness. Or it could be described as sunya, which is void. Again, paradox. Now, I'm going to do a discourse here. Some years ago, I was doing a long-form dream study. I was taking surveys of people's dream experiences and calling out certain tropes that I was seeing that were universal throughout other people's dreams. Now, in the case of people experiencing the void, when asked, have you ever experienced blankness or the void in your dreams? They always took on two different expressions here. The dreamer said it was all white, and the dreamer said it was all black. And they're both describing the same experience, yet the way that it came across to them was diametrically opposed. Was this paradox, this blankness? Now, is the void white or is the void black? When you are put in that, what is that like? And also, what is the emotionality attached to that? Is this despair? Is this the dark night of the soul? Or is this ecstasy? Is this fulfillment? Is this becoming whole? So let's instead look at a Tibetan master, Milarepa, infamous Tibetan master. Quote, if you realize the emptiness of all things, compassion will raise within your heart. If you lose all differentiation between yourselves and others, fit to serve others you will be. And when in servicing others, you will win success, then you will meet with me and find me. And through that, you'll find Buddhahood. So what is being said here, right? If you are them and you serve them and you keep this mind that you're serving yourself, do unto others as others have done unto you, then this is Buddhahood. If you can retain this mystic approach, this mystic experience. So, how did the Abrahamic religions get in on this? And if we take Judaism as the precursor, then obviously our mysticism lends itself towards Kabbalism, which we're not going there. But it could be to say that it may have started in the deconstruction of Ezekiel's vision. This Merkaba, this chariot, illustrated in this visionary experience of Ezekiel. So what is this experience of Ezekiel? This would seem to be noetic more than it is mystic. But still yet, Philo Judaeus will make commentary on how the therapeutae, those who practice near Alexandria, are approaching contemplative or contemplative monasticism. And we could also assume, perhaps, that the Essenes are also beginning this move towards Kabbalism, this move towards contemplative monasticism. And if we go down that line and we look at Isaac of Acre, he gives this quote that the soul becoming one, absorbed into God, is as a jug of water into a running well. This is very on the nose of allegories that speak of Atman and Brahman, a drop of water meeting back with the ocean. The Hasidic masters would also say and question this allegory, this water of the ocean of the infinite, how this dropness, you being a drop or distinct or separate from the ocean, is the illusion. Very highbrow stuff. You are not different. The idea that you are individual, the idea that you are not in the ocean right now, is the Maya, is the illusion, is the thing that holds back Buddhahood, if we're just going to throw all the terms in here. If we look over to Sufism instead, we can see how there's this belief of when the self passes away, when you die, you are filled with the presence of Allah. And I think that's, pretty on the nose. Allah. When you, self, individual, pass away, you are filled with the presence of the whole thing. This aspiration to unification with God leads to Sufi mystics giving quotes like, I am the real. I hope that gets across. I am the real. Capital R. I am reality. But here we can start to introduce the girders. And what I mean is, although the aspiration of Islamic mysticism is to have a direct acquaintance with God, the consequences of doing so, or to speak of said experience, could be contentious with the orthodoxy. And we'll be seeing that as it arises in Christian mysticism quite a bit as well. So from here, we are going to do that. We are going to give a greater divulgence. I've hopped around quite a bit, so we're going to give the figures of Christian mysticism to give a fuller illustration of the subject at hand. And we begin in the 5th century with Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. And notice, we don't know the real name. This is Pseudo-Dionysius. And this name is attributed to several treatises, all of grave importance, much interest, honestly, on the divine names, on mystical theology, on the celestial hierarchy. That's a nod for those who have been following the course since the beginning, and on the ecclesiastical hierarchy. This is a mystic developing a complete doctrine, a complete theology, a mystical explanation of all there is. And to get a flavor of how he's coming at this, quote, unknowing, or agnosia, which is agnosticism, unknowing is not ignorance or absence of knowledge, as ordinarily understood, but rather the realization that no finite knowledge can fully know the infinite one, and that therefore he is only truly approached by unknowing, by agnosticism, by agnosia, or by that which is beyond and above knowledge. Notice how contentious that is. Or more specifically, how contentious it sounds to the orthodox structure that soon will become. As the language of Christianity will develop, we'll hop forward and see that in the 12th century, you see Saint Bernard of Clairvaux terming the spiritual marriage. And this is soliciting what we've been talking about. This spiritual marriage, this unio mystica, mystical union, is the same idea that we've been painting throughout. The union with God is the union with all self, is being married with the I art thou, that is me, Atman is Brahman mentality. It's just, this is the language now. Mystical union. We see this spoken through Saint Bonaventure in the piece The Journey of the Mind into God, where it says, quote, in things of beauty, he contemplated the one who is supremely beautiful, and led by the footprints he found in creatures, he followed the beloved everywhere. It is everywhere. it is all self, 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 self. The beloved, God, this is the new language. So you notice this is appropriate language, though. And we can instead jump to the next figure, which is an anonymous author. We don't even have the name. And this piece is called The Cloud of Unknowing. And this work states more toward nothingness than great somethingness. And here's this paradox that we're seeing again. They're one and the same. That perception of unity is within nothingness. This cloud of unknowing terminology is the ineffability of life itself. This confusion of living. That this cloud of unknowing stands between us and the divine presence. That to seek God in the darkness of his own incomprehensibility. This cloud of unknowing is not God, but is the barrier between. This would be called samadhi in the Zen tradition. This samadhi is a thought-free state of being. To feel neutral, to feel calm. If you could think of soliciting a meditative experience where you are not thinking. You are completely mid. Peaceful, restful, almost full, neutral. This is not divinity. This is not divine. This is the cloud of unknowing. This is the intermediary. This is the incomprehensibility. And this is to say directly that in order to reach God or self with a capital S, we have to forget everything so as to remember God, self, capital S. This is very evocative of the rivers of Lethe. We have to forget. Knowledge stands in the way of this open experience. The thought that you know things, that you know what's going on in the world, you know what this is on about, is the girder from you having this kind of experience. You have to forget in order to enter this samadhi. Now, if we say that we are reflections of God, then we might say that only God is actually real. He is real, capital R. Then everybody borrows from that real essence. And this is all reflection. This is all Maya. This is not real. The only real thing is capital S, self. I hope I'm not going too far here. I'm just teasing away. So, the big figure, 14th century, is Meister Eckhart. Seeking the experience of the soul disappearing, only leaving mind, emotion, will of God. Just intuition, just attunement. How to bring about just this attunement. And in his mystical experiences, he is creating a number of abstract terms that will ultimately help fill out the German language. You have to create language to even stand a chance, to begin to make a portraiture of what you are experiencing within yourself. Man doesn't reach this state by simply abandoning all things. There comes a point of choosing to live without why. This speaks to the former cloud of unknowing, to choose to live without why. And he must not seek, just be open. Does this not sound very Buddhist? And in Eckhart's case, he's making a distinction between the Godhead and God. The Godhead is the origin of all things, that which is beyond God. And so in this case, God, instead of Godhead, could be more thought of as that capital L-S self that is always around and always within and always without. And the Godhead is beyond, the starting thing. So in this case, the quote is, God and the Godhead are as distinct as heaven and earth. If I were not, God would not be God. I hope this is getting some wheels turning. This is not, notice here for the first time, we're seeing contentious language coming from somebody who has a name. This isn't pseudo-Dionysus. This isn't an anonymous author. This man's name is Meister Eckhart. Well, that's not his real name. Meister means master. But anyway, he will be charged with heresy. And he'll say to that, what I have taught is the naked truth. And while it's not outright known, it's implicative that Eckhart, before he had died, had retracted his statements. So he was not put to the stake. So there's the question right there. Why did Eckhart live where Giordano Bruno died? Giordano Bruno clearly had a noetic experience. For those who don't know, Giordano Bruno was a priest who had an experience, a mystical vision, a noetic experience that showed him that the stars in the skies were suns and that planets went around those suns and that there are beings well beyond the earth. This is spitting in the face of geocentrism. And Eckhart retracted his errors and lived. Whereas when the church was coming after Giordano Bruno, he did not retract. He stood in that naked truth. And they killed him. They burned him at the stake. So this is a display of how the mystic stands in the religion that they participate in. They are not necessarily acceptable. The best way that they can be included is generally if they don't have a name, if they're anonymous. But they're never going to quite be comfortable because it's a power structure. If it was the ancient past, everybody would be initiated. Everybody could contribute to this conversation because we want to know more about the mystery of it all. But in this case, it's a power structure. It's not interested in the mystery. And so these figures might contribute to the structure of it all, might garner some further intrigue off the sides of it all, but we've got a ship here. So don't shake it. So what's going on here? The mystical experience is the thing that makes religion. It makes spirituality. It is the very thing sought. Yet, the institutions stand in the way of that experience. They bogart that experience. They limit that experience. And this isn't exclusive to Christianity. Of course, there's the girders as we briefly witness them in Islam, or we could see the contrast between how we might interpret Kabbalism with Orthodox Judaism, or we could look at India and see what is done with the priest class, with the Brahma class. And in that case, you abandon your family and you go live in the forest. That doesn't really make you much of a talking piece towards everybody around you if you are secluded, like a transcendentalist living in the woods. And yes, we can go into the debate of the legitimacies and the technicalities of the disparateness of these different experiences, whether it's nothingness or whether it's a great somethingness, or whether everything is illusion, or whether this is all what's real, yada, yada, yada. The baseline of it all is that there is a unifying experience, a transcendental, attainable experience that is only able to be expressed with the very limit of words. Again, if we are over in this tradition, then these are the words that we'll use because that's the closest proximity. But the unification of all of these things and their disagreements with each other is because of the words. It is ineffable. It is a felt experience beyond that which could be accurately portraitured. But this mystic tradition carries on, and it has its own story too. We could talk about Saint Teresa. We could talk about William Blake. But one that I find particularly interesting is George Fox, the founder of Quakerism. And why do I find this interesting? Well, quaking, shaking, this mystical Holy Spirit embodiment, otherwise known as glossolalia or ecstatic utterances, speaking in tongues. And while we could speak to the modern day very quickly with that, we could talk about the Pentecostal movement as it ultimately branched out from the Azusa Street revival. But this has history and has a conflated history in the same sense as we've been seeing with mysticism. You could trace glossolalia or the speaking in tongues back to certain quotes of the Bible, tongues of fire, or you could look at Justin Martyr and look at the quote, "For the prophetic gifts remain within us." It's a little evocative. Or I think the one that speaks to this most plainly and most strongly is Montanus. Montanism ultimately was eradicated by the church, but the Montanists, and this is around circa 150 to 170 AD, they spoke in tongues. They were showing evidence of the presence of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit speaking through you is blabbling. This is ineffability. If you try to, calm yourself down after the experience, like having a dream, and then try speaking on it, that's going to be a bit different than if you are having the experience and you are actively speaking as the experience is happening. Anybody who's face first in a heroic dose of plant medicine will go down the road of this glossolalia, this cathartic intonating, this releasing of something that is speaking through you. You're not quite identifiable as a self, an individual, as you experience that sensation. And in the same way is Montanus and his priestesses in early Christianity experiencing the mystic ineffability and speaking in tongues. And we can contrast this and ask the genuineness of the Pentecostal speaking in tongues act in the modern day. But my question here is the quaking. Is this mysticism? This blabbling? Is this also mysticism? And as we're seeing with how they treated Montanus, this is not always acceptable. And the fact that it is acceptable in the modern day is still contentious because it is very specific to the Pentecostal movement. But still, yet nobody's going out and hunting them as it was in the past. So this, I think, is something that further kind of opens the field of this idea of Christian mysticism. But all of it comes down to personal revelation or personal communion with God. That's the word here, God. This personal experience with the divine or the absolute, if we want to make it more general and palpable to the greater audience. But it does boil down to, is this experience inside of you or is this experience outside of you? If it's outside of you and it's coming in, that tends to be a noetic experience where you are given knowledge, such as Ezekiel's vision. But you don't necessarily feel this subsumation of the Abzu or the waters of Nun. You don't tend to be engrossed in the ineffable sensation of being one with capital S self, I am reality, capital R, phenomena. But what's interesting about these ineffable experiences is it can bob and weave between both. In one kind of bridge of that song, it could be external, and in the next bridge of that song, it could be internal. This is very hard to cleanly classify, even though it's attemptedly been so by scholars and by religious institutions. So let's break this down in as much as we can. We had the ancient past. We have a guide, someone who has dedicated themselves, a shaman, a Taoist priest, whatever, and they are displaying these private ecstasies and bringing people along, whether we call this a vision quest, what have you. And this is a sharing and a validating, a societal validating of divinity and of the approachability of divinity, its availability. And then much, much, much later, we have debate as to what this is. Is this achieving through nothingness? Is this achieving through oneness? This is all blah blah, is what I'm trying to get across. Because it is, to say, for instance, the scientific community, the unified field, the base of all existence. If we keep digging deeper than molecules, deeper than atoms, deeper than quanta, what is there that unifies all of the things we've witnessed on our ladder downward? That is the field, the unified field, undifferentiation. And interpretation, if this is a thing that can be experienced, the interpretation of that thing is helpful and is interesting, but is also not it. It's like anything else. If I see the tree, I say tree. It's not the tree. It helps point towards it. It helps me know what to look for, but it's not the thing that is being reacted to. The language, the debate, the how it's spoken to over here and how it's spoken over to here is missing the point. This ineffable thing that comes to Joan of Arc, this thing that could make itself available to anybody of any faction, of anywhere around the world, of any composition of body, of any wealth, of any education, this thing dismissed as all in the head by psychologists, what have you, this non-sensory awareness, this thing teased at by faculties beyond the current apprehension of modern mentality, is the mystery. That's what this is. It's a mystery. The mystic experience is soliciting, just kicking up some of the dust out of the mystery. The main questions of the human condition at large is, what are we doing here? What should I do? What's up with death? And we don't know. We have vessels of approach for convenience. These vessels of approach were born out of the mystery by those that brought words to the mystery, and now we have the beginnings of a ship. But it is the mystery. And this is something to cherish, to investigate. And it's not a question. It's not the question. The question implies that there's an answer. It is the great mystery. We don't know. And that's liberating. This modern approach and this lack, this dissolve of spirituality and religious tradition as we are experiencing, is because we are allergic to this kind of approach. This collective hive mind does not bear with an uncertainty. It does not want to admit that it's not found out. They'll sell it over and over again that physics is almost there. It's almost there. It's about to have its unified theory, and then everything will be found out. We're always on the cusp of solving it all as it's sold. But no. No. Any slight initiation will introduce one to the real chaos of it. And not chaos in the negative sense, just the beauty. Beauty comes from the unknown. Everything births from the unknown. Allow the mysterious. Embrace the mysterious. It is the poetic. It is the sacred. It is the holy. This is where it's at. And we can't hold it down and ask it its name. It doesn't obey that. It is the rascality of it all. And this is the mystical definition. This is what we needed to arrive to. If this is interpretable to you as much as it could be interpretable, this phenomenal world, the impermanence of it all of it, baselined, is the mystery. Nothing and everything, something and not, together, one, separate, all, contradiction, paradox, the human condition, seeking onward. The spiritual studies course is not monetized on YouTube. If you get any ads throughout any of these sessions, no, that is to the personal financial positive of YouTube. The spiritual studies course is only supported financially by a Buy Me Coffee page in the description below. If you want to support free public education in spirituality, mythology, and religion, please consider a donation to the page. This was obviously a lot of fun. I haven't been this emphatic for a subject in a long time. I hope you got as much out of it as I did.